My family thought it would be funny to leave me stranded in another state. "Let's see if I can make it back," they said. They laughed and drove off. I never went back. 15 years later, they found me, 107 missed calls. You won't believe this, I'm writing this from a cafe in Seattle while looking out the window. Yes, it is a shame. It's been exactly 15 years since my loving family decided to abandon me in the middle of nowhere in Colorado, and today I finally decided to tell my story. It all started in November 2010. I was 25 years old and had just gotten a promotion at the tech company where I worked in Chicago. It was nothing out of the ordinary, but for the first time in my life, I felt proud of myself. I had my own small apartment, paid my bills, and was building something of my own. I agreed to fly to Denver for Thanksgiving. Even though I had a bad feeling about it, my family had never been particularly affectionate. My older brother, Mark, 32, had always treated me like a pain in the ass, and his wife, Brenda, 30, constantly made comments about how I was too good for the family. Ever since I left for college, my younger sister, Lily, who was 15 at the time, was the only reason I kept coming back. To understand what happened, I need to explain something important. 2 years earlier, Mark had borrowed 5,000 pesos from me when he was about to lose his house. It had cost me a lot to save that money, working double shifts while I studied, but he was my brother, so I gave it to him. The condition was that he would pay me back 200 pesos a month until the debt was paid off. Guess how much he paid me back in those 2 years? Not a single peso. Every time I mentioned the loan, my mom would chime in, "It's family, Kale, don't be so stingy. Mark has 3 mouths to feed," as if I were the villain for reminding him of his promise. Thanksgiving dinner was tense. I made the mistake of mentioning my promotion, and everyone's eyes rolled. Mark muttered something about bragging again. When I mentioned I was thinking of buying a small condo, my dad said, "Some of us settle for taking care of our family instead of chasing money." On Saturday, they decided to take a family trip to Rosboro State Park, a beautiful place, really. As I drove, I finally gathered my courage and asked Mark about the money. I needed it to make some down payments on the condo. "Really? You're going to ruin this trip with that?" "Always so selfish," my mom replied, immediately jumping to his defense. "Kale, someday you'll understand, family is more important than money." We arrived at the park around noon. During the hike, I branched off a bit to take pictures of the rock formations, photography, another hobby my family considered pretentious. I was about 200 meters from where we had parked, focused on capturing the scenery, when I heard the car engine start. I ran back just in time to see our family SUV starting up. Mark stuck his head out the window and yelled, "See if Mr. Successful can handle himself. We won't always be there when you need us." My dad was behind the wheel, laughing. My mom was in the passenger seat, looking away but not protesting. Brenda was filming with her phone. I only saw Lily in the back seat, wide-eyed and not laughing. Then I realized they had taken my backpack with my wallet, jacket, and water bottle. All I had was my phone in my pocket, with 18% charge and no signal. "We'll be back in a bit. Think about what it means to be part of this family," my dad yelled as they drove away, kicking up dust. I looked around. The visitor center was closed that day for repairs. The nearest road was about 8 kilometers away, and the temperature would drop considerably by sunset. I was really stranded. At first, I thought they would be back in half an hour, that it was just a stupid lesson. I waited for an hour, sitting on a bench, but nothing happened. 2 hours passed, and still nothing. My phone battery was going down, and I still had no signal. I decided to start walking towards the main road. The sun was starting to set, and it was starting to get cold. Every so often, I checked my phone, hoping for a signal. Finally, almost 3 hours later, a weak signal appeared. Immediately, I received several messages. "Mark, you learned your lesson, princess. LOL. Dad, when you're ready to apologize, let us know where to pick you up. Mom, this is for your own good, honey. Family comes first." It was that last message that broke me. For my own good, leaving me alone with no money, no water, while the temperature dropped to 5 degrees Celsius. At that moment, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I didn't reply. Instead, I used 10% of my remaining battery life to search for the nearest town and get my bearings. I walked until it was completely dark. My fingers were numb, and my stomach was growling with hunger, but every step I took away from them felt like a step towards freedom. When I finally made it to the small town of Sedalia, my phone was dead, and I was exhausted. But in that moment, seeing the town lights in the distance, I knew with absolute clarity that I would never return to my family. This prank had been the final straw after years of manipulation, contempt, and emotional abuse. What they didn't know was that their plan to teach me a lesson would end up teaching us all something much deeper. Me, that I could survive without them, and them, well, they would find out 15 years and 107 missed calls later. The Morning Brew coffee shop bell rang when I pushed open the door. I was exhausted, hungry, and still shivering from the cold. The heater in the place hit me like a blessing. "Are you okay, kid?" An old lady behind the counter looked at me with concern. "You look like you just saw a ghost." I sat down on a stool and told her a version of what happened. I don't know why I trusted her, maybe because her kind eyes reminded me of my grandmother, the only person in my family who had truly loved me. "My name is Martha Johnson," she said as she poured me a hot coffee and a plate of eggs and bacon. "Don't worry about paying now, no one leaves my place on an empty stomach." While I ate, Martha called her husband, Bob. He arrived half an hour later, a large man with calloused hands and a direct stare. "You have someone to call, son?" he asked after listening to my story. "My phone is dead," I answered. Martha handed me the charger from the coffee shop. As my phone came back to life, notifications started coming in. I had several messages. "Mark, where the hell are you? Weren't you where we left you? Dad, that's enough, Kale. Answer. Mom, we are worried, Kareem child. Answer, or we will call the police. And then one from Lily, Kale, please tell me you're okay. I didn't mean for you to do this. I'm so sorry. Lily's text almost made me give in, but then I saw another one from Mark, typical of you, making us worry to get attention. Always so dramatic. That's when it really hit me, they would never change. Even now that they had abandoned me, I was the one to blame. You can click on share and more to see if there is a part 2.